Welcome to The Favorites, the podcast presented by Bet365. We are part of the Action Network. I am Chad Millman, Chief Content Officer of the Action Network. It's training camp time. We're finally here from Loyola Marymount to St. John Fisher University. Training camps are in session for all 32 NFL teams. Even Travis Kelce made it from a Taylor Swift concert all the way to the Kansas City Chiefs training camp. I can't think of two people with whom I'd rather discuss training camp than the two folks I'm going to do it with today. First, as always, my co-host, my companion, my compadre, my BFF professional better, Simon Hunter. Hello, Simon.
Oh, Chad, isn't this the best? We're going crazy about Patrick Mahomes throwing deep balls and about Williams just completing passes over the middle. I mean, what a time to be alive.
Listen, I'm not even going to lie to you. Like, of course, I've watched the Patrick Mahomes, Xavier Worthy throw.
Maybe one of the best throws I've ever seen.
Probably 50 times today.
Yeah.
And I did go to the Bears Instagram and did swipe through every single image. Because what they do is they get you with the still, and then you have to swipe, and they give you a highlight. And then you go a still and a highlight. What I loved was two things. One, like, everything is Caleb Williams, and I'm dissecting. Is he throwing the ball better than Justin Fields? And two, I see my kid, like, he has liked every single one of the posts. We're in full swing. Returning to the show, a very special guest, one of ESPN's most beloved personalities, one of the most read writers on ESPN.com. That's right, it's Bill Barnwell.
I would have accepted one of ESPN's personalities, let alone being beloved. So that's a major feather in my cap.
By the way, just being one of ESPN's personalities these days, that's kind of a big deal.
Sure. No, quite. Anytime it's a big deal, but I'll take it.
Just beloved being there.
Better.
That works.
Being there is great. Just being beloved is even better. So I'm always happy.
Well, you're all of those for us, Bill Barnwell. As a reminder, the Favorites podcast is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, restrictions apply. Also, very important programming note for those listening and those watching. We're excited to share that our popular college sports betting brand, BBOC, is launching its very own YouTube channel. Get every episode of the BBOC podcast, plus live shows and other exclusive content on the new BBOC channel starting this Thursday. July 25th, whether you're into college football, college basketball, college baseball, any other college sports, our new BBOC is the channel for you. Check out the announcement this Thursday. Make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss any of the fun college football action this season. All right, Bill. You had a great column the other day. I want to start right there because you admit that you have made the Kansas City Chiefs your Super Bowl pick going through the past 4 seasons, going back 4 seasons. Took me a second to put that together. You had a column this week. We had to put it in quotes, sexy Super Bowl picks. Before we even talk about like who you put on that list,
okay,
explain like your methodology for how you came to the conclusion of what defines a sexy Super Bowl pick.
Okay, so there's no like perfect example. And it's because the idea of what's trendy or quote unquote sexy changes from year to year. The Jets last year are a good example. This time last year, the Jets were a sexy pick, but I don't think typically that was a very unique scenario, I would say. Typically, I think when we think about sexy teams, there's a few criteria that make sense to me. So I went with teams who greatly outplayed their preseason expectations. So their preseason over-unders I grabbed from ProFootballReference.com. You had to overperform that by like 2.5 wins minimum, just because you were, you blew away what people were expecting from you the year before. Had to be competitive. Ideally, win a postseason game. I was willing to take a team that lost in the postseason if they were competitive in that game. And I think most importantly, the one that's kind of the through line through so many of these teams, a young quarterback that broke through last year. Either it was a rookie who had a great season, maybe exceeded expectations, maybe a guy in his second or third year who took that jump forward and really looked like a superstar in the making, maybe an MVP candidate for the upcoming season. And I went through history and went through all those teams and entirely history through about 2011, because that was kind of when the NFL went to the slotted draft model, really kind of the line of demarcation between the past NFL and the current kind of NFL market. And I have to say, I was kind of expecting to dispel the idea that these sexy teams should be sexy. But as it turns out, there might be something behind this trend and these trendy teams being a little better than we might hope.
Give me an example of why that is. Going to the past, if past is prologue, give me an example of the sexy teams that proved this theory.
Yep. So let's go back to, I want to say this is 2013. This would have been the second year for Russell Wilson and the Seattle Seahawks, where that team did exceed expectations. Remember, Russ wasn't even supposed to start his rookie season. Matt Flynn, who they signed from the Packers, was supposed to be the starter. Russ wins the job in training camp from Matt Flynn. Seahawks have a good year. Russ got better as the year went along, but it was really Marshawn Lynch in the defense and Russ kind of along for the ride. He plays well late into the year. In the postseason, they beat Washington in that really ugly game where Robert Griffin tore his ACL. That Washington team also would have been a trendy team the next year. And then they lose to the Falcons in a classic in the divisional round. So young quarterback, exceeded expectations, won a playoff game. Perfect criteria, perfect example of a trendy team. They go the next year, Russ improves. They have a young roster that gets better. They win the Super Bowl. Another success story might be the 2019 Chiefs, the Patrick Mahomes third season. I guess first year he's on the bench most of the year. Year 2 he wins MVP. The Chiefs do exceed expectations. They're I think the top seed in the AFC that year, but they do lose to the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. So the following year, young quarterback, took them as far as they could go. MVP from the year ago, classic trendy Super Bowl pick, and they go out and win a Super Bowl. There are plenty of examples of teams that didn't live up to expectations. The Mitch Trubisky Bears after the double doink might be the most classic example. The Browns with Baker Mayfield a couple of times where he looked like he was breaking out. Teams like that where, again, young quarterback exceeded expectations. But we have a few teams this year who kind of fit this criteria. That makes for an exciting mix we don't normally have. I would say at least 3 teams who come close to fitting our idea of what a trendy Super Bowl pick might be here in July.
All right, so before we get to that, I'm going to ask Simon to guess which ones you're
Oh.
talking about. But
Wonderful.
one team that was trendy last year that didn't get there,
Mhm.
the Jags.
Yep.
And like when you think about those teams that they were over that 2.5 win
Mhm.
beyond their expectations threshold. They had a young quarterback. They advanced in the playoffs. That team cratered in the second half of the year. Why were they an exception to this rule?
Well, Trevor Lawrence got hurt. I mean, they were in position to be the 1 seed in the AFC. Remember, they had that Monday night game. They were playing the Bengals. It was the Joe Burrow-less Bengals. And they were, I want to say they had either inherited the 1 seed because teams had lost on Sunday, or a win would have put them in the position to be the 1 seed in the AFC heading into the final few weeks of the year. They lose, Trevor Lawrence gets injured, and they don't win a single game the rest of the way. There were other issues with that team. Calvin Ridley never really fit the way that I think people were hoping he was this time last year. The defense, Josh Allen had a great year, but Trevon Walker was good, not great. Secondary had some issues. But we could be sitting here having the same conversation about the teams we're going to mention as trendy teams heading into this season, where on paper, you can see a scenario where everything goes right for them and they are Super Bowl contenders. We just know that historically, typically, unless you're that Seahawks team or that Chiefs team or other teams from the past, usually something does go wrong. There is something that seems great on paper that doesn't actually play out that well in reality.
All right, Simon, who do you think these sexy teams are that
There's
Bill is
3.
referring to? He mentioned 3 of them.
Well, I'm just going to piggyback on what he's saying that, I mean, I'm not saying that football has become boring, but I feel like there's guys like Bill out there that are so smart now that, I like to say that people get things wrong all the time. We've been pretty right? The most hyped up team 2 years ago was the Eagles. They made it to the Super Bowl. Last year, 49ers were, I mean, people did not stop talking about the 49ers in the offseason last year. They made it to the Super Bowl. So we've kind of seen it catch up, right? There's so many smart people in the industry now. They know what they're talking about. They're going to nail these teams. And then unfortunately for them and us, we have to talk about them for 5 months until the season kick off. So that's why people are like, all these hype teams. And I can nail 2 of them right at the top because I know how easy it is. The third one I'm not going to be so sure about, but I know it's going to be Houston for one. We've already talked about it. They dominated this offseason, adding pieces to that offense, offensive line, defensive line, wide receiver position, the running back position. He's got to have Houston. And then the second one's going to be everyone's favorite pick, right, Chad? It's Green Bay. I mean, Green Bay, we talked about, they are going to be the all hype team. It's all there. Jordan Love finished the season going 18-1 touchdown interception ratio. It's like, how can Bill not have him on his list? The third one, I don't know. So I'm excited to hear what that one is. But those would be my 2 guesses on teams I feel like they have to be on the list because they're sexy. They are. I mean, I hope they are on that list.
Bill, do you want to
wise.
go ahead?
Very astute from Simon.
Simon is nailing it. And when I read the story, I was a little bit bummed when I read the story because I wanted to be surprised, and it speaks a little bit to what Simon is talking about. And obviously, we haven't named the third team yet. The third team was the same team that everybody was so excited about last year as well, and then kind of met expectations this past year. We're talking about the Lions. So it's the Packers, the Lions, and the
that's
Texans.
perfect.
It's a little like you can forget about the Lions almost because they met so many of the expectations and they were a sexy team the year before. But Simon's not wrong. Like everybody can see it. Like what your philosophy about the sexy team is bringing structure and rigor to an idea that sort of everybody feels that is in the atmosphere. And so I'm glad you did it. But it also like it's the same teams everybody's talking about.
That's why they're sexy.
It's why they're sexy. But it also makes you feel like I can't back these teams because everybody is backing these teams at this point. So now I got to go against it. The Packers have a significant issue right now. Quote, significant. It's the quote S words podcast. Jordan Love isn't practicing. And he's not going to practice until he gets a new deal. In your mind, what kind of impact does that have on anything about to do with the Packers' success?
Not much, because it's hard for me to believe that deal's not going to get done. Jordan Love is in the actual final year of his current contract that he signed as sort of like a hedge almost. Like he didn't get his fifth year option picked up, but the Packers also didn't decline it. They sort of found this weird middle ground where they gave him a little bit more than what, or a little bit less than what the fifth year option would have guaranteed him, but were able to spread it out over 2 years for cap purposes. It's really unique. There's not really any other players who have done that. And so what's made this tough in a way is that there's not really comparables. You have that element where, like with the Trevor Lawrence contract, it's okay. What do the other quarterbacks after year 3 get who are playing at Trevor Lawrence's level? That's not a hard deal to negotiate. This one is, because there's not really that contractual comparable. And then in terms of his experience, Jordan Love sat for 3 years basically before becoming the starter in Green Bay. And the only other quarterback who's really done that happens to be Aaron Rodgers, the guy who preceded Jordan Love all those years ago. So it's not, there's not that contractual comparable in terms of, or the experience comparable. And so it's a little harder to get this done than it would be for other quarterbacks, but I do think this is going to get done before camp even really, gets into high gear. So to me, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a big hindrance to the Packers. If we get to, the end of camp or we're halfway through camp and preseason starting and then he's still not practicing, that's a concern. But I would be surprised if this wasn't done by, either the end of this week or at the latest the end of next week.
So here's the question.
Yes.
Take the Packers out of it. Simon, I want your answer on this too. Take the Packers out of it, because I think of the Packers, Lions, and Texans, I think the Packers are probably the most likely to regress. There's too much, there's a lot of sort of noise in all those signals from last year. And even Bill, you pointed out in your story, like they barely were above that threshold. In fact, they might not have even been above. I think they were only 1.5 games above the threshold of what you have sort of established. So, or above their expected win total. I think they were at 9. They were at 7.5 for the expected win total. Someone is going to regress. The Texans and the Lions are not going to meet in the Super Bowl, right? So you don't know, but you also do know. And so, and it, by the way, I'm totally making that bet. I am 100% making a futures bet on the Texans and the Lions. I did this last year. Evan Abrams, a research genius, has a stat that it's now true for 10 of the last 11 years. The teams with the 5 lowest odds to make the Super Bowl, and they all had to be, I think, 12-1 or shorter, have played each other in the Super Bowl. So I made a round robin bet last year. I had, Chiefs, Eagles, Chiefs, Niners, Bengals, Eagles, Bagels, Niners, Bills, Eagles, Bills, Niners. And, that was one of my bigger paydays of the year, because I think it was like 30-1. But who's more likely to regress? Simon, Lions or Texans?
I would go with the Lions just because I do think their division is harder than it was last year. Like, they're not going to have a Kirk Cousins injured. They're not going to have a Justin Fields who's, he was kind of banged up and he wasn't playing at the highest level. And Green Bay was so unproven. They really didn't find their groove until, week 9, week 10. So I could definitely see the Lions, but at the same time, you could say the same thing about Houston's division. I mean, they're much improved as well. But if I'm just looking at, little chinks in the armor that I could believe in, I guess it would be Detroit, but it's really tough, Chad. Like, both these teams, I can't see either of them not making the playoffs. They really nailed the offseason, both these teams.
Bill?
I'm gonna make the case for both teams, and I want to hear what you think, Chad. I want your pick between these two. So the Lions had the point differential of a 10-win team. They were 12-5, but their point differential, you plug it into a formula that I believe Daryl Morey of all people came up with back in the day, and they really were more of a 10-win team than a 12-win team. And that was a little surprising to me. I think they were a team that, they didn't feel very weak, but you go back and look, I mean, they got blown out by the Ravens in midseason. They lost to the Packers. They lost to the Bears by 2 touchdowns. They lost to the Cowboys in that game, where realistically they probably should have won, but they lost to the Cowboys. But there was not that underlying level of elite performance that comes with other 12-win teams. So that was a concern for me. Simon mentioned the division. Their schedule is tougher. They're playing a first-place schedule this year in the NFC North, so that makes a difference. The Texans on the other hand, 10-7. So they kind of were about as good as their underlying performance suggested. They had a ton of injuries, especially along the offensive line, which are not likely to recur. But there's this unique thing about the Texans that's different from most of the other sexy teams we talk about from the past, or most of the other teams we expect to kind of make that breakthrough. You think about the Texans, you think about CJ Stroud, Will Anderson, Derek Stingley, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. Those are all young players in the prime of their careers, and that's great. They do have a young core. Around that core, Nick Caserio, the former Patriots general manager, has really been aggressive in adding free agents, not just this year with Daniel Hunter and guys like that, but really to fill out the roster the last few years. They've been a team that's heavily relied on veteran free agents on short-term deals. And so the Packers were the youngest team in football last year. The Lions were one of the 5 youngest teams in football last year. The Texans, I believe, I'd have to get the exact number in front of me, they were on the older side. I think they were one of the 10 oldest teams in football a year ago on a stat-by-stat basis, just strictly who is on the field and how old each player is at that time. So I know the Texans, their best players are young, and that's valuable because you want those guys to keep improving, and that's what typically leads to a breakthrough for some of these trendy teams. But there's a lot of older players surrounding that core. And so I kind of feel like maybe our expectations for the rest of the players around that young core are a little too high. I don't know which either of those were convincing. I don't know if you believe in either of them, but
Oh,
what do
I
you
don't need
think?
convincing on either one. I have a very specific opinion on this,
Which
and
is
it
what?
pains me because I love the Detroit Lions. I
Oh no.
love the ethos. I love Dan Campbell. I love Jared Goff as a comeback story.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way they draft. I love the way they play. But they are also a thin line team.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean is every single game, they could be a fourth down away. We saw the dichotomy in that championship game against the Niners, right? In the first half, everything's going perfectly. They take the right risks. They all go well. In the second half, everything's going badly. They take the same risks. It goes badly. And so the the way that their games play, they've got to win a lot of the risky plays
Mm-hmm.
in order to achieve at the level that they achieved last year. And I think that makes them ripe for aggression. Whereas the Texans, to me, have such a higher ceiling also because I think CJ Stroud is better than Jared Goff. I think on the end, with Will Anderson, he's equal to Aiden Hutchinson. Now they've added Hunter on the other side. Like, this is a team that has a very good mix. To me, the biggest challenge with them is we talked about the Jaguars. The Jaguars got snake bit in the second half of the year last year. So if Trevor Lawrence all of a sudden is good again, then they're that much more competitive with the Texans. That makes it a lot more challenging. But if you look at me, if you're asking me, the Lions are ripe for regression. Right now, the Lions 12-1 to win the Super Bowl. The Texans 19-1 to win the Super Bowl. So I go to you, Simon Hunter. Are you more likely to bet the Lions to win the Super Bowl or the Texans to win the Super Bowl?
I'm gonna go Lions, even though it's not a great price, just because I don't need to face Mahomes. Like we've seen it time and time again, things can break a certain way. Where if he's not there, every team in the NFC has a chance now. And yeah, I totally agree with what both of you guys have said, but it is one of those things where they're a high variance team, right? Just because of their coach. So at that number, I honestly think that's a fair price for Houston as well. Like 20-1,
Yeah.
19-1, that sounds right for them. I wish it was a little higher, obviously, for the Lions, but 12-1 in a no Mahomes conference, like that's a good price to me.
By the way, Simon, you and I have been banging on the Bengals since
Mm-hmm.
early in the offseason when they were in the plus 20-1 category. They are now 13-1,
Sounds
fifth
right.
shortest odds ahead of the Buffalo Bills. Bill, do
Yeah.
you have an opinion on the Bengals?
I love the Bengals. I think they are super underrated. I don't know that I agree with Joe Burrow that he's been forgotten, but I do believe that the Bengals are a team that last year, kind of everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. I mean, Burrow was hurt heading into the year. was only really healthy for a couple weeks. And the defense really, I feel like they were limited with what they could do because of the changes they made. So they, as part of accounting for Burrow's contract, which was going to grow dramatically after he signed his deal, they sort of prepared to move on from players. Like they let Jesse Bates, their star safety, go. They let Von Bell, another very talented starting safety, go, and they used young players to replace those guys, and they weren't up to the task. Lou Anarumo, their really talented defensive coordinator, does such a good job of coming up with exotic blitzes, exotic pressures. He'll blitz 7 on one play, he'll drop 8 into coverage on the next. And to do that, you have to have a back end you trust. You have to have safeties who can play both spots, safeties who can cover half the field, who can play center field. And they didn't have that last year. And so it led to too many big plays, and they had to be more vanilla on defense. This year, they bring back Von Bell. They signed Geno Stoneway from the Ravens. Now they have that ability to be more creative on the defensive side of the ball. And that's the only thing in the playoffs historically. Well, 2 things. Either Mahomes does not have his entire offensive line, and the Buccaneers can blitz him and win easily, or you slow him down as a post-snap processor. And that led to the comeback in the second half for the Bengals in the AFC Championship game a few years ago. Now, I have a question for you guys, because I trust you, I respect you. I feel like this is we can have a more thoughtful conversation than just strictly the sexy picks for 2024. Here's my question for you both. If you had to pick the sexy or trendy team that we're going to be having this conversation in 2025 about, who's that team?
We're going to get to that answer right after this message from Gametime. Simon, can you name the fastest growing ticketing app in the United States?
Gametime.
That's right. It's Gametime. I love Gametime for 2 reasons. First, they still sponsor this show. Second, I actually use Gametime all the time. They have amazing last-minute deals, including pro and college basketball and football. Speaking of which, I'm actually opening the Gametime app right now from my home here in Connecticut. And guess what? I can get in to see New York Yankees baseball tomorrow night in the Bronx for less than $60. No matter where you live, download the Gametime app, get out, have some fun this week. You deserve it. You can redeem code favorites for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, just download the Gametime app and use code favorites for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. I love Burnwell's question. There's only one team that is the right answer, but Simon, I'll let you give an answer, and then I'll give the right answer.
I won't steal Chaz. We're on the same page with that one. So I'll go, instead of NFC, I'll go AFC. I'm going to go with the Colts. I'm really drinking the Kool-Aid. I love Steichen. And, Chad knows I'm a big believer in Anthony Richardson. If he does take that next step, right? Because we only saw a little bit of it, but I love what we saw. Like him picking his time to run with like their design plays, everything about the Colts. Pittman, and historically underrated as a wide receiver. I think he's incredible. Their D-line has a rotation of a bunch of no-name guys. They're all good, though. They all can get pressure, and their D tackles are solid. To me, it's all there for the Colts team that if they shock the world and they won that division, I could easily see them being a darling next year. Just his body type, too. That Cam Newton look, like that big, strong, athletic runner, we love. It's just visually pleasing to us. So I'll go with AFC. Chad, go ahead. I was going to say them. There's no doubt that's a team we got to talk about. Go ahead, Chad.
It's the Bears. Bill, how is it not the Bears? Like what they're going to do this year with Caleb Williams, what they're going to do with Rome Odunze, what they can do with a revamped defense. It is a critical year. Like if they end up having to blow up the coaching staff, and I don't know what sort of the line of demarcation or what the criteria, to put it in corporate speak, what the KPIs are going to be for that coaching staff to be able to keep their jobs into the next season. But how could it not be the Bears?
Well, the Bears are the team I expected Chad to pick. I know this podcast thoughts about the Bears. I know this is a known Bears loving podcast going back to last year as well. If I'm not
I am nothing if not predictable.
Well, that is fine. I think the Bears are a very, very reasonable pick. And I
do have another team though, but I want to hear what you have to say.
The team I was going to say is not the Bears or the Colts, although I think both those picks are very solid. I think the Bears are a good pick because I think the Bears are likely to improve, but not be a Super Bowl caliber team. Like they're going to be just good enough that people can see the Caleb Williams magic happening. They could say, okay, we're going to be sitting here next offseason. Man, the Bears finally addressed their offensive line. They went out and drafted a tackle in the first round. They added that other edge rusher next to Montez Sweat. They finally got the pieces they need. They went 8-9, or they went 9-8. They went 9-8, but they won 6 of their last 8 games. Caleb Williams had 14 touchdowns against 2 picks in that stretch. This is going to be a team that takes that leap. I think that's a very reasonable and even likely scenario. But there's a team that nobody is talking about right now. And I don't understand it because we've seen it work before. Do you know who it is?
Well, is it the Arizona Cardinals?
It's not. It's not the Arizona Cardinals.
Okay.
We're talking about this team even less than the Arizona Cardinals, and I don't understand why. This team is the Los Angeles Chargers, Chad and Simon.
Ah,
Los Angeles
such
Chargers,
a good idea.
Who have a head coach in Jim Harbaugh, who took over a Niners team that had not had a winning season in 8 years and went 13-3. The quarterback of that team is Alex Smith, who the fans were chanting, "We want David Carr" at the year before. He left in free agency, did not want to go back. Harbaugh brought him back, and they won 13 games. They immediately improved. The Chargers have Justin Herbert. They have a quarterback who I think we all love. He's had his iffy games here or there, but I don't need to sell you on Justin Herbert playing at a high level. They were a team that greatly underperformed their point differential last year, 5-12 with a 7-win point differential, even though the Raiders dropped 117 points on them in December. There was still much below expectations. They're getting a massive coaching upgrade. Their quarterback is playing at a high level. They massively improved their offensive line this offseason. They're not a sexy pick right now. But would you not see a scenario where they go 9-8 or 10-7 next year? And we're sitting here saying, man, they got an elite coach. They have an elite quarterback. They finally got the defensive pieces they needed next to Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. They improved in the secondary. Harbaugh's got them going. They beat let's pick on a team. They beat the Ravens in the postseason. They beat the Ravens in Baltimore in the wild card round. They lost by 3 points to the Chiefs in the divisional round. Could they not be a team you see as a sexy pick next year?
Completely. Can totally see it. The challenge I have with AFC teams is the quarterback lineup is just stacked, right? So Patrick Mahomes is going to be Tom Brady-esque, right? It's always going to be something, no matter what is happening with the talent on his team, you're always going to have to beat Patrick Mahomes. All right. Lamar Jackson, now a 2-time MVP. Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, who is the only guy who can beat Patrick Mahomes. You go up and down that lineup, and the AFC is loaded. And in the NFC, there's more of a chance to be sexy because there's fewer teams and quarterbacks that are sexy. So to me, I would lean NFC teams. That's why I thought you might say the Cardinals because they showed some promise last year, and I was impressed with how much heart they had and with the way Kyler Murray played with that team. And they got better, they got more talented. So that's why I thought the Cardinals could be interesting in what is generally a weaker conference.
No question. And that's a really valid argument for the teams in the NFC. I think a team like the Panthers, who I'm not high on, but if Bryce Young totally turns things around, they could be that team because the division is so weak. But I would point out CJ Stroud. Who would have thought a year ago?
Yeah, that's
we would
right.
be sitting here having a conversation. All those quarterbacks were there. We were more high on Lawrence than they were a year ago. We were more high on Herbert a year ago than we are now. And CJ Stroud still managed to break through. So I feel like if you get the right caliber of quarterback, and I think Justin Herbert can be that guy, you're going to get sort of admitted to that club where even if you don't have Mahomes, you would still have a quarterback who can beat Mahomes on his best day. And I think Justin Herbert has shown he can do that in years past.
You know what's interesting? Simon, we have not mentioned the Dallas Cowboys once. And Bill, who is excited to be an ESPN personality, might have his ESPN personality badge taken away because we have not mentioned the Cowboys as a sexy team this year or as a sexy team for the future. Why do you think they don't qualify to be a sexy team now and into the future?
There's a bunch of reasons. I think everyone's come around, Chad, right? Even last year, people were still drinking the Dak Kool-Aid. They were like, you know what? You can't fault them for all their woes in the playoffs, everything like that. After last year, those people are totally off the boat, right? You don't hear those people at all just because those pick sixes were so alarming and so not Dak. Like you just don't see Dak play that way where he just looked totally lost, throwing balls over the middle into triple coverage. It was bizarre. So to me, they're not sexy just because I think people have been burned so hard, and we've never had a team that has their all pro number one receiver not signed for the future, and then their all pro number one quarterback not signed for the future. We've never seen this, Chad. At least I can't remember in my lifetime a team that has the guy at quarterback, the guy at receiver, and both of them are playing on their final year of their deal. And we've never seen a quarterback like Dak. Well, I guess Kirk Cousins had the power, but Dak did something crazy with this contract, which I would love to hear Bill's take on.
Mhm.
Dak's contract cannot be tagged when his contract runs out at the end of this season, which means Dak, if he doesn't want to sign a contract for $60 million per year, he can go test the market. And there is not a thing Dallas can do. And if he does do this, I mean, again, Bill can check this. I think it's $50 million against the cap, dead cap next year. Like that's the power Dak has right now over the Cowboys. So I would love to hear Bill's take on it because we've never seen anything like this. And this is the lowest I feel like the public perception is on the Cowboys since Dak's been there at the quarterback position.
Yeah, leverage is a juicy thing when it comes to NFL contracts.
Sexy. Sexy.
Yeah, so some would say, quote unquote, sexy. The leverage is a very valuable thing because it forces teams to do things they don't necessarily want to do. When Dak signed his last deal a few years ago, remember he played on a franchise tag the year he got hurt, and then the following year he was going to play on a second franchise tag if the Cowboys didn't sign him, which would have meant the following year he would have become a free agent. Teams can franchise guys 3 times technically, but in reality, it is not something that teams do in practice. It would have been an astronomical sum for Dak. So really, he was 1 year away from the exact situation he is now, unrestricted free agency, Cowboys losing him for nothing, and the Cowboys capitulated. For all the talk about what they didn't want to do, they didn't want to pay him $40 million a year, they didn't want to give him any no franchise tags, they had to give him everything he wanted because he had all that leverage. And now he's in an even more advantageous spot this time around. He has all that money to work with. He has, doesn't like he needs life-changing money. He already has that from this last deal. He has the ability to push this all the way to free agency if he's so inclined. And that has the Cowboys trapped. Like they can't go out and sign a bunch of free agents because they don't know if they're going to need to have $60 million for Dak next year. They haven't been able to get the CeeDee Lamb deal done. They have not been able to get the Micah Parsons deal done. And Parsons is eligible for a deal this offseason because they don't know what they're going to have to do about Dak. And so that's fundamentally changed their offseason. They have not been able to go out and sign anybody. Their 2 free agent signings this year are Ezekiel Elliott, who is by running back years, 49 years old. I think in the NFL years is under 30, which is sad. But and they signed Eric Kendricks, a veteran linebacker who's been a cap casualty each of the last 2 seasons, but he knows Mike Zimmer's defense, their new defensive coordinator. So I think they're not sexy because we've seen a lot of talent leave the organization, very little talent come into the organization. And, I think Simon's point about the playoff issues are valid. I mean, put it this way. How many people heading into this NFL season remember that Dak Prescott was second in MVP balloting last season? That's how good he was last year, and how much of that was washed away by how bad he and the Cowboys were in the postseason. The only reason I'm optimistic about the Cowboys this year is that I am pessimistic about everybody else in the NFC East. But if the Eagles are better than I think, and I'm very skeptical of the Eagles, I would not think that there's any reason to back the Cowboys because they're the opposite of a sexy pick. Like they're the pick that you keep around because you're used to what they look like and you don't have to worry about dressing up and putting on airs for them.
Yeah, it did feel like the Cowboys last year, a lot of it was not smoke and mirrors, but lacking in substance, sort of making it happen when the moments weren't the most important, and Dak lighting it up in a way that felt, to me, superficial, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we saw in the playoffs, I think, is what we all expected to see. I don't know a single person who wasn't betting against the Cowboys and betting the Packers at +7 in that first round game.
I
It
think
was such an
was it not
obvious.
plus like was it not plus it was like plus 8 or 9 at open, and then I think it did get down to plus
It
7
got down to
you're
7
right.
by
It was just
yeah.
everyone piled on it.
It was ridiculous. So the Cowboys are so interesting for all these reasons. They're always going to be talking points. But Jerry Jones, what kind of mess has he created as a GM that he gets himself in this situation with Dak? They can't improve the team. He keeps Mike McCarthy. He kept Jason Garrett forever. For all his sort of Hall of Fame accolades as a genius, as someone who has turned the Cowboys into the most powerful and valuable franchise in all of sports, feels like the guy kind of doesn't know what he's doing when he's putting together a team.
I mean, owners can be stubborn. Rich people, they don't get told no a lot. And so I believe with Jerry Jones, there's an element of like having to fight him as an organization, right? Like in some ways, the Cowboys are a very modern and progressive organization. They are a team that drafts really well historically year after year. They're a team that has heavy investments in analytics. They're a team that has really produced a lot of young talent, but at the same time, that can not always be the case if you have a meddlesome, shall we say, owner who wants to make decisions when it comes to football. And I think about the classic one, the famous argument between Jerry Jones and his sons and the staff about whether they should draft Johnny Manziel in the first round all those years ago. They talked Jerry Jones out of it. They drafted Zach Martin, who was going to be a Hall of Fame guard for the Cowboys, who's played there, been incredible there for a decade. That's the kind of the thing you have to do. And every real NFL organization pretty much has to have a moment like that with their owner here and there. Owners, even the most hands-off owners, they watch a guy one time in college, they like him. They, see a guy during the draft and they like him. Like there's plenty of things, plenty of times this stuff happens, and being a good GM is talking your owner out of some bad decisions. But Jerry Jones is the owner and the GM. And so he has the not only the clout and the ability, but also the self-confidence after winning all those Super Bowls early in his run to think that his decisions are always going to be right. And so at some point, Jerry goes to the organization and says, okay, we have to get this Dak deal done, do whatever it takes to get it done. The problem is he's done that too late. And so that is sort of the conundrum the Cowboys find themselves in, is I think if the people who are not Jerry Jones in that front office wanted to get this Dak deal done, they would have done it 2 years ago. They would have done it last year before it got to this point where they had no leverage, where they could not go out and improve the roster. And because Jerry Jones sort of decided that he didn't want to pay Dak until the last possible second, because he decided he wanted to wait for all these other wide receiver contracts to get done before he gave CeeDee Lamb the contract CeeDee Lamb wants, it's going to cost them extra money. It's overconfidence. It's overconfidence, and well, I'm going to make them wait. It's just not thinking prudently about the finances of an NFL team and the finances of building an NFL team. Jerry Jones has all the money. The issue is not paying those guys. He can afford to pay them. It's just the reality of wanting to make certain players on this roster wait until the last possible second to get a deal done, whether that's hubris, whether that's confidence, whether it's foolhardiness, I can't say. But it has cost the Cowboys. It already cost them on this current Dak deal, and it's going to cost them a lot more if Dak leaves in free agency.
One more team I want to ask you about, because every year, every bettor knows they want to bet on the Pittsburgh Steelers over season win total. It always ends up in that 8.5 range. Mike Tomlin always pulls it out of the bag somehow. Bill Barnwell, is this the year where the Steelers finally don't go over their season win total?
I hope so, because I'm going to pick them to be a team that declines this upcoming season. I mean, they just exhaust me, because like every year I make this argument for why they're going to decline. Every year they do exactly what I'm saying on the field, and then they still manage to find a different way to pull it off. Like 2 years ago, I was like, okay, like they got an incredible season out of TJ Watt. There's no way he's going to be that good again. If he gets hurt, they're in trouble. TJ Watt gets hurt in like week 2. I'm like, okay, this is great. I know I don't want to see TJ Watt get hurt, but like, okay, I know what I'm talking about. Steelers are going to struggle. They don't have Ben Roethlisberger, and they still went 9-7-1. Last year it was okay. People are too excited about the offense. Kenny Pickett, I know people think he's an MVP because of some preseason snaps. He's not that good. Cam Hayward is in his 30s. He might not be the same guy. Cam Hayward gets hurt. Kenny Pickett stinks. they still go 10-7. And they've managed to do something that I don't understand how it's possible, because, like, in theory, yes, you want to be a team that protects the football. That's a smart way to win games, but it's hard to do, especially if you don't have an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady at quarterback. The Steelers managed to win the turnover battle with Mitchell Trubisky as their quarterback, with Mason Rudolph as their quarterback. And that's the only way they've won games. I think they're literally winless over the last 3 years when they don't win the turnover battle, but they're like 15-4 when they do. And that's a credit to great coaching, a credit to knowing your limitations on offense, to having a great defense. But this team is just not that good. Their schedule is tough. Tomlin had no ability to win a bunch of his close games before the last couple of years. Their quarterback situation, they're starting 2 cast-offs from 2 different organizations. They got rid of Deontay Johnson for cap reasons. Their offensive line is just okay. Their defense is old. I think the oldest in football last year. Have some young, exciting pieces in Joey Porter and Keanu Benton, but like this, if Mike Tomlin was not coaching this team, they'd have a 6.5 win total, probably, would be my guess. And that is a testament to how good Mike Tomlin is, but also just how underwhelming this team looks on paper. I'm going to trust the numbers. It's gotten me right before. The Packers defied me for a couple of years with the Aaron Rodgers era. They finally went my way. Tennessee under Mike Vrabel for a couple of years, just absolutely breaking my brain. Eventually, they had that losing streak in the second half of 22. They got right. I feel like the Steelers can pull this off, but they keep proving me wrong. So I'm getting really frustrated about this entire situation.
Look, last week, we had Nick Giffen and Sean Kerner on the podcast, and they will establish the luck rankings, which is this brilliant methodology and formula that basically baselines luck out of the equation and tells you what teams should have done in a game and what they did because of the luck factors in the game. And we were talking about the Steelers, and all we did last year was talk about how anemic their offense is and how terrible their offense is. The Steelers also had more explosive plays than anybody else in football. And so that's why they were getting to those wins. But the problem is, that's what happens for them every single year. Simon, every year the Steelers will have that freakish explosive play, that freakish interception return for a touchdown, that freakish forced fumble in the 3 straight games that TJ Watt plays between his bicep injury and his hamstring injury. Like, it just freaking happens. Yes or no, Simon? Are you over the Steelers? Are you under the Steelers and their win total?
I am finally, after I think I talked about a good 10-year run of always taking their over, I am finally on the under this year. And it's what Bill just talked about. I think last year they had an incredible amount of luck about the quarterbacks that got injured in the division and when they played those certain teams. This year, it doesn't feel that way, right? Their division is even harder this year, and their schedule is brutal. If you go through and look at their schedule, it's just a brutal lineup, and just the way that the schedule plays out for them, it's brutal. So finally, Chad, under on a Tomlin team for the first time in my professional career.
We have consensus. As a reminder, the Favorites podcast is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for the biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boosts and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, restrictions apply. Simon and I return with our next episode of The Favorites on the Action Network YouTube page Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern, to talk NFL luck rankings. Download us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. Rate, review, subscribe, leave us 5 stars, say whatever you want. Feedback is a gift. Until next time, love you.